for my music. You can hear it in my words. No question to retaliate.
My name is Faraz.
And my name is Tani.
We're both members of Students Against Israeli Apartheid at the University of Toronto, and we're honored to be moderating the opening night of Israeli Apartheid Week 2011. So 6 years after the call from Palestine for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, we would both like to welcome you to the 7th Annual Israeli Apartheid Week. This week, which first took place at the University of Toronto in the year 2005, will this year take place in an astounding number of 77 cities across the world, which is inspiring. These cities include cities in the US, the UK, Palestine, South Africa, Mexico, and Venezuela. Over the years, Israeli Apartheid Week has played host to a powerful range of speakers, organizers, audiences, and projects. But few elements of our work are as remarkable as our persistence and dedication, including the persistence and dedication of all those who have graced us with their presence tonight. Despite attempts to curtail our efforts, there is no reason for us to lose hope. More than simply a threat to the BDS movement, we must remember that the opposition, the repression that we face, is a testament to our successes. In what could be argued to be the most unfriendly of commentaries on Israeli Apartheid Week, Israel's Road Institute describes Israeli Apartheid Week as follows, and I quote, "The risk posed is that Israeli Apartheid Week will create an equivalency between Israel and apartheid South Africa that penetrates the mainstream of public and political consciousness. While we disagree with the Road Institute that this would be a bad thing, we hope that the fear that IEW will expose Israel's apartheid system to public and political consciousness comes to pass. Such exposure will help end Israel's apartheid policies and practices, as similar efforts did for South Africa less than 2 decades ago." So welcome to Israeli Apartheid Week 2011.
We would like to begin by recognizing that as we gather this week to assert our opposition to colonialism and apartheid and our solidarity with Indigenous struggles for dignity and self-determination, we as the organizers of Israeli Apartheid Week in Toronto believe that we cannot speak meaningfully about Israeli apartheid without speaking first about the realities of apartheid here in Canada. Canada's reservation system and the treatment of Indigenous peoples was closely studied by the planners of apartheid in South Africa, although this is a hidden chapter of our history. From its very foundations, Canada has been based on the theft of Indigenous lands and the genocide and displacement of Indigenous peoples. In crucial ways, the Canadian state's treatment of Indigenous peoples, historically and currently, can be described as an apartheid system, from the imposition of the Indian Act, band councils and reservation system, to stolen children in residential schools, from the continued theft of lands and resources by governments and corporations, to the cultural appropriation of native traditions and culture. Canada's colonial past is celebrated in the names of our streets, towns, and cities, while erasing the genuine identity of the original peoples of this land. This colonial project continues to this day, encroaching on native land with golf courses, subdivisions, and highways, environmental devastation inflicted on Indigenous communities, and the reality of hundreds of disappeared and missing Native women in the past 3 decades alone. There are countless other examples of this colonialism in practice today. This colonialism is also reflected in the oblivious and lack of response by the Canadian authorities and population. In the face of more than 500 years of colonialism, Indigenous communities continue to resist and survive. Their multifold and diverse struggles demand our active support, especially in the face of state repression and criminalization. As non-natives, we have a role within our communities to further the process of decolonizing Canada. If you are with us in opposition to Israeli apartheid, we encourage your consistent opposition to apartheid right here in Canada. Let us support both the resistance of Indigenous Palestinians and the survival and struggles of Canada's Indigenous nations. From Palestine to Turtle Island, there is no justice on stolen land.
So this week we set our sights on the university. We interrogate the institutional complicity of our campuses and their prospects for resistance. We mean to hold to account our university and its purported commitment to the vigilant protection of human rights. We have an exciting lineup tonight. We have Judy Rebick, Abigail Bakian, and Shada Al-Husseini. And I have conflicting reports about just how much I can divulge about tonight, because tonight is a very exciting event, not only for all of you, but also for Students Against Israeli Apartheid. But I have conflicting reports about how much I can divulge about this. So instead, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Judy Rebick. Judy Rebick is a Toronto-based social justice activist, writer, journalist, educator, and speaker. She's former CAW Sam Gindin Chair in Social Justice at Ryerson University. She's the founding publisher of Rabble.ca, the week's media sponsor, and Canada's, it also happens to be Canada's progressive independent online media news and discussion site. Judy has been an activist for Palestinian human rights over several decades and has chaired many discussions on Israel and Palestine. Without further ado, Judy Rebick.
Thank you very much. I'm apologizing in advance because I have to leave before the question period because I'm not feeling very well. I'm fighting one of those bugs that's going around. But my job is supposed to be to rabble-rouse a bit. It's hard to do when you're sick. But so the first thing I want to say is to acknowledge that when I think I had just become the Gindin Chair, or maybe a year, when the idea of having Israeli Apartheid Week on campus came up, and I was a little. I wasn't sure about it, and it wasn't because I don't think Israel's an apartheid state. I went to Israel when I was a student myself in 1969. When I came back, I gave my father shit for giving me money because I said, this is an apartheid state. So I've always thought that about Israel since I went there myself and saw the way they treated Arabs, and at that time also Sephardic Jews. But I thought it was a little too in your face given the sensitivity. And you guys have proven me totally wrong. Totally wrong. Because first there's the brilliance, the propaganda brilliance of calling it Israel Apartheid Week. Because every time these people, put a motion through Parliament or through the legislature, or try to shut you down in other ways, they have to say Israel's not an apartheid state, right? They have to say it's hate. It's hate talk to say Israel's an apartheid state. So each time they have to say it. And so over time, it really is a brilliant propaganda tactic. Because each time it becomes more familiar. Something that's forbidden by the mainstream becomes a familiar phrase to people. So that's the first thing. But the other thing, and I think this is where we should feel very proud of this movement, is the way in which this movement has stood up against every kind of intimidation. And I've been around a long time, and like in the pro-choice movement in the 80s, there was intimidation from the anti-choice, who are kind of, the JDL's kind of like the anti-choice. And from governments that were arresting people who were performing abortion. But never like this. I've never seen anything like this attempt to shut down freedom of speech that's gone on, particularly on campus, against Israeli Apartheid Week. And from security deposits that is even happening this year at York, from presidents of universities writing letters to try and stop students from having events, from intimidation that grossly exaggerate the dangers, so-called dangers of having these meetings, to, as I said before, to motions in Parliament, to the formation of this Canadian parliamentary coalition against the so-called new, they don't say so-called, against the new anti-Semitism. All of these efforts, including, harassing a few professors, harassing students, threatening students, it's just been one thing after another, and the Students Against Israeli Apartheid, the Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid, stood up to all that intimidation and insisted on your right to tell the truth about Israel. And that has been a phenomenal success. Phenomenal success. And by standing up in what I think has been an incredibly dignified way, I don't know how else to say it, because in all of the meetings on Israeli apartheid, the tone is good, there's discussion, the meetings are friendly, and nobody is called out for asking a question that other people don't like or hooted down. So there hasn't been, often when you get attacked, the response is to attack back and to be vicious back. And this movement has not done that. It's really stood up in a dignified way, said what we have to say, but not fallen into the trap of over-polarization. And on this issue, that's very important because people are silenced on the issue of Israeli apartheid because they're afraid that somebody's going to call them anti-Semitic. And of course, that charge of anti-Semitism, which is still so charged, like the worst thing anybody could say to you is that you're an anti-Semite. And the fact that they go on about this and completely ignore the fact that some of the most prominent supporters of Palestinian rights are Jewish, which they never, ever say, completely ignore the fact that a growing number of young people in the Jewish community are turning against Israel, completely ignore the fact that there's never been any sign of anti-Semitism in the movement against Israeli apartheid in Canada. Not one sign of it that I've seen. Not one. They ignore that and call everything, every criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. And on top of that, we have this craven media, which won't even report when the Prime Minister gave a speech last year at that, or last spring at the Canadian, I think, I can never remember what it's called because I'm blocking on it. Parliamentary coalition against the new anti-Semitism. The most outrageous speech where he said that defense of Palestinian rights was just a thin veil over anti-Semitism, that people who supported Palestinian rights used the veil of being in support of human rights, where he said that Canada was denied its position on the Security Council only because of its support of Israel. And nobody in the media, no one in the media, except for me because I'm on the Q panel, the mainstream media, no one in the media criticized him for this, or they didn't even report that he said this outrageous statement that he made. But the good thing is that because they've gone so far in this direction of calling everybody anti-Semitic who's critical of Israel, because they've gone so far, the Canadian Parliamentary Committee is saying that universities in Canada are hotbeds of anti-Semitism. University presidents were forced to defend themselves. Right? Last year they had to defend themselves, and one after another, including the president of U of T, they went before that coalition and said, no, universities are not hotbeds of anti-Semitism, and our students have the right to freedom of speech and academic freedom. And that is a huge victory. That is a huge victory. We haven't won in terms of all of our desires of freedom and rights for the Palestinian, but the fact that we stood down this attempt of intimidation at campuses, and as far as I know, at least I've heard, the only attempt is this attempt at York University to charge for more security in the room, and I just heard that they're saying, well, you don't have to pay now, you can pay later, which to me means we're not going to shut it down if you don't pay. So that means that there's not been a single attempt across the country to stop these meetings this year, and that is the victory right there. And the last thing I want to say is that the uprising, this phenomenal uprising in North Africa, and starting to be in Iraq. There's been some protests starting in Iraq too. It's going to change everything, because with the rise with democratic revolution sweeping the Muslim world, I have to tell you my favorite tweet is, wouldn't it be something if Iraq and Afghanistan are the only countries in the Middle East that aren't democracies? But anyway, it undermines the whole discourse of the war on terror. And if the discourse on the war on terror is undermined, the support of the West for Israel is undermined. And that's going to change a lot of things. We don't know yet what's going to happen, obviously. But the change is already in the air. And also in terms of, you know, the Israeli peace movement, which has been isolated for a long time, getting bigger again. Not being able to be persuaded by the conservative right-wing governments. So I think that this year, Israeli Apartheid Week is happening on the verge of, I'm not going to say a new world revolution because I said that so many times before and that works that way, but on the verge of massive changes in the world, because in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the domination of American imperialism in the world, what's happening in North Africa now is going to change that. We don't know yet how, but we know that it's going to change it in a way that is dramatic and in a way that's going to be in the interest of the peoples of the world. So I think that having had Israeli Apartheid Week during this time, when it's been tough to have, when you forced the debate to happen, that it was tough to force to happen, and now we're making real gains in Carleton. They started a divestment campaign a year ago. They've got 2,000 signed signatures now for divestment in Carleton. They forced a big debate on student council with a lot of support on their side. They didn't get quite what they wanted yet, but they forced the debate, and this month they're going to the Board of Governors and they're going to force a debate there. So I think we've established Israeli Apartheid Week now as a week that goes on and has the right to go on campus. So let's go ahead and move ahead with a divestment campaign throughout campuses in the United States and really hurt them this time, really hurt the Israeli military machine by divesting all campus money, all pension money, all whatever else they invest in, because I've lost track of it, from the Israeli military machine. Thank you.